You call yourself a sniper commander. Lucas Hayes held up her rifle case not to hand it to her, but to make a point. His eyes moved across her like she was an equipment list. He already knew was wrong. Around him, 12 of the most decorated SEAL operators in the Pacific Theater were watching, and every single one of them was waiting to see what the young woman standing in the doorway would do next. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She let the silence answer for her. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with us, you already know we don't do ordinary stories. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and stay with us until the very end, because what happens in this unit over the next 72 hours will change every person inside it, including the man holding that rifle case, who thought he already knew everything he needed to know. The file on Commander Lucas Hayes' desk said her name was Captain Ava Bennett, age 26, transferred from a classified reconnaissance unit, operating under a designation that his own security clearance couldn't fully open. That alone should have told him something. It didn't. Hayes had been running the SEAL Mountain Warfare Training Center in Alaska for 4 years. In that time, he had evaluated over 200 candidates, men who came with reputations, men who came with records, men who came with the kind of quiet confidence that told you within the first 3 minutes whether they were real or whether they were performing. He had sent 41 of them home. He had never once questioned his own read on a person. He questioned it the moment Ava Bennett walked through the door. She was smaller than he expected. Not fragile. There was nothing fragile about the way she carried herself, but compact, economical, the way a person moves when they have spent years learning to take up exactly as much space as they need, and not 1 inch more. She wore standard-issue cold-weather gear, no unit patches, no visible rank beyond the captain's bars on her collar. She carried 1 bag over her left shoulder and a rifle case in her right hand, and she carried both the same way, like neither of them was particularly heavy, and neither of them was particularly important. Hayes was standing in the center of the room when she entered. He didn't move toward her. He waited. She crossed the room, set the rifle case on the table beside him, and looked at him directly. "Captain Ava Bennett," she said, "reporting as ordered." Hayes picked up the rifle case before she could say anything else. He didn't open it. He just held it and looked at her. "You call yourself a sniper," he said. The room 12 operators, seated along the walls in various configurations of studied indifference, shifted almost imperceptibly. Not dramatically. Just the small, unconscious adjustment of people who suddenly understood that something worth watching was about to happen. Ava looked at the case in his hand. Then she looked at him. "I don't call myself anything," she said. "The results do." Hayes studied her face for signs of performance. Anger. Wounded pride. The need to push back to establish herself to make sure he understood who she was. He found none of those things. What he found instead was something that bothered him more: patience. She wasn't waiting for his approval. She was simply waiting for him to finish. He set the case back on the table. "Results," he repeated. "You have 3 confirmed kills logged in an operational context. Marcus Reed, behind you, has 114. You want to talk about results?" He gestured toward the far wall, where Staff Sergeant Marcus Reed sat with his arms crossed and his expression professionally blank. Reed was 38 years old, built like someone had designed him specifically for the work, and had spent 17 years becoming the best sniper the unit had ever produced. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't arrogant in any way that he would have recognized as arrogance. He simply knew what he was, and what he was the standard by which everything else in this room was measured. "I understand the comparison," Ava said. "Do you?" "Yes, you're telling me the number matters more than the record behind it." She paused for exactly 1 beat. "I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm telling you those aren't the only numbers in my file." Hayes opened the folder on the table beside him. The visible portion of her record was deliberately, bureaucratically thin, in the way that classified service histories always looked like someone had taken a real document and cut out everything that made it meaningful. "A recommendation letter from a general whose unit I can't contact," he said. "An evaluation period that doesn't align with any training cycle I can identify. and 3 years of service that apparently took place in locations that don't exist. He looked up. That's what you came here with. That's what I'm allowed to show you, she said. There's a difference. In my experience, people with real records don't need the mystery. For the first time, something moved across her face. Not anger, not hurt, but something quieter and more considered. Like she was making a decision about how honest to be with him. In my experience, she said, people who only trust what they can see are the ones who get surprised. The room was very still. Hayes leaned back slightly. He had been doing this long enough to know when someone was giving him a line they'd prepared, and when someone was telling him something true. That sentence had not been prepared. That sentence had come from somewhere real, and it had come out the way things do, when a person has spent years watching the truth of it prove itself. He didn't let that show. You'll be assigned as support observer on the Ridgeline exercise Thursday, he said. You carry medical equipment and communication gear. You observe. You do not handle a rifle. He picked up her case and held it out to her. Keep this locked. She took it from him without expression. You're telling me to watch, she said. I'm telling you to learn. She looked at him for a moment, not challenging, not submissive, just looking, and then she nodded and picked up her bag and walked toward the door. She stopped at the threshold. Commander, she said without turning around. Bennett. When the exercise is over, I'd like to request a formal review of my file. Hayes looked at her back. On what grounds? On the grounds that the evaluation you just gave me was based on information you don't have. She paused. That's not a complaint. It's a request. Then she walked out. The room exhaled. Marcus Reed uncrossed his arms and looked at the door she'd just gone through. He didn't say anything. But something in his posture had changed, some small involuntary concession that told Hayes the man had heard something worth hearing, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. Hayes looked down at the thin file on the table. He had a feeling he was going to regret not being able to open the rest of it. She was given a bunk in the overflow quarters at the east end of the facility, separated from the main barracks by a corridor and a locked storage room. Hayes had arranged that without thinking about it too hard, but the separation was real, and everyone in the building understood what it meant. She was present. She was not one of them. Not yet. Possibly not ever. What nobody had arranged for, and nobody had anticipated, was what she would do with the space. The first night. Specialist Danny Kowalski, 23 years old, 8 months into his first posting, the kind of earnest that hadn't been ground down yet, was pulling a late-duty rotation and walked past her door at 01:30 to find a line of light coming from under it. He knocked. Come in, she said. He opened the door and found her sitting on the floor with her back against the bunk frame and 3 separate maps spread across the floor in front of her, weighted at the corners with her boots. She had a weather report in one hand and what looked like a hand-drawn terrain grid in the other. The overhead light was on. She had not slept. Captain, Kowalski said. Do you need anything? Do you know this mountain? She asked. She didn't look up. He blinked. Ma'am, the Ridgeline exercise. Do you know the terrain? He stepped inside, unsure whether he was supposed to. I've done 2 rotations up there. Standard pathfinding mostly. Some target work. Sit down. He sat cross-legged on the floor across from the maps because there was nowhere else to sit, and because she had said it like it wasn't a question. Tell me about the valley approach, she said. The eastern one. Not the primary route, the secondary. What's the wind behavior in the first 100 meters past the tree line? Kowalski looked at her. How did you know there was a secondary approach? Because the terrain map shows a drainage channel that would have been used as a movement corridor at some point, and those don't get abandoned unless there's a reason. What's the reason? He stared at her. There's a wind funnel. The whole eastern valley acts like a compression zone when the mountain draft kicks in. Shots go wide. Everybody who tries to work from that angle gets burned. She nodded slowly, like she was filing this away somewhere specific. What does wide mean exactly, in terms of deviation at 300 meters? I honestly, ma'am, I don't know exactly. I just know the senior guys avoid it. But they avoid it consistently, or only when the conditions are bad. Kowalski thought about it. Consistently, I think, even when the wind seems manageable. She made a mark on one of the maps. He couldn't see where. That's useful, she said. Thank you. He sat there for another moment, not sure if he'd been dismissed or not. Captain, he said, can I ask you something? Yes. Why are you studying this if you're not allowed to shoot? She looked up at him then. She had dark eyes, very direct, the kind that didn't waste time looking at things they weren't interested in. Because the exercise isn't about shooting, she said. And if I do this right by Thursday, nobody will know I was there. He didn't understand that, but he nodded and got up because the way she'd said it made it clear the conversation was finished. He was almost to the door when she spoke again. Kowalski. Ma'am. The eastern approach. You said shots go wide. Which direction? He thought about it. Left. Always left. She made another mark. Thank you, she said again. Get some sleep. He went back to his bunk and lay there for a while with his eyes open, trying to figure out why a woman who'd been told to carry medical equipment was more interested in the mountain than anyone carrying a rifle. The second day was physical assessment, standard. Mountain movement protocols, load-bearing endurance, cold weather response timing. Hayes ran it personally, which was unusual, and every experienced operator in the unit knew why. He was watching her. She performed exactly as well as her file suggested she would, which meant well, but not spectacularly. She carried the weight. She hit the checkpoints. She didn't push for the lead position or fall behind in a way that required intervention. She was in every measurable sense exactly where the numbers said she should be. Marcus Reed ran the course 40 seconds ahead of everyone else, because he always did, and stood at the finish line with a water bottle and a quiet expression while the rest of the unit came in. He watched Ava finish. She wasn't winded the way most people were winded. She was breathing deliberately controlled, managing the recovery, the same way she'd managed everything else economically without theater. Not bad, he said. Not a compliment, not an insult, just an observation. Thank you, she said. You know the old rule about physical performance and tactical performance. Which one? The one that says they're correlated. She looked at him. They're correlated, she agreed. They're not the same thing. Reed studied her. Where'd you do your sniper qualification? I can't tell you. Can't or won't? Both. She said it without apology. I'm not being difficult, I'm being accurate. Classified. Yes. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. You know how many people I've met who use classified as a way to avoid questions they can't answer. Probably more than people who use it because it's true, she said. That's a fair point. She looked at him steadily. I'm not one of them. Reed looked at her for a long moment. We'll see, he said. Yes, she agreed. We will. The briefing for the Ridgeline exercise happened Thursday morning at 0600, and Hayes ran it himself. The objective was a target location inside a valley complex roughly 4 kilometers from the staging point simulated enemy installation. 2 observer positions. 1 primary shooting solution identified in the pre-mission analysis. The team would establish the shooting position, neutralize the target, and extract within a 2-hour window. Simple. Clean. The kind of exercise they ran twice a month. Except that Hayes had quietly modified the enemy position setup the night before, and he hadn't told anyone. The target installation had been moved 40 meters laterally from the position shown in the briefing materials. Not enough to be obvious on approach. Enough to eliminate the primary shooting solution completely. He wanted to see how the team adapted under pressure. He also wanted to see what Ava Bennett did when the plan fell apart. She was listed in the manifest as medical support observer, carrying a trauma kit and a radio. Her rifle case was locked in the equipment room. She was standing in the back of the briefing space while Hayes ran through the plan, and he watched her without appearing to watch her. And what he noticed was that she wasn't looking at the briefing map. She was looking at the window. He followed her gaze. The window showed a strip of mountain sky pale and dense with overcast. There was nothing to see except gray. He looked back at the map. She kept watching the sky. The movement phase went without incident. The team covered the 4 kilometers in good time, maintaining formation and noise discipline, and arrived at the forward observation position ahead of the planned schedule. Reed took the primary position and established his setup. His spotter Sergeant Cho took the secondary. The rest of the team fanned into support positions. Ava stood 10 meters behind the primary position with her trauma kit and her radio and watched everything. The first sign of trouble came when Reed's spotter called out the target coordinates and Reed put his eye to the scope and didn't immediately confirm. "Something's wrong," Cho said quietly. "I know," Reed said. He adjusted. Adjusted again. He was extraordinarily good at this. Hayes had seen him work through bad conditions, unfavorable angles, unexpected variables. But the precision of what he was doing right now said he wasn't finding a solution. He was looking for one. Hayes crouched beside him. "Report." "Target's not where it should be." Reed said, his voice completely flat. "It's been moved. I've got rocks on my primary angle. The gap in the coverage is less than half a meter." Hayes looked through his field glasses. He could see the problem immediately. The installation had shifted just enough to put the entire target behind a natural barrier that the original plan had accounted for, except the plan had accounted for it being 40 meters to the left, where there was a clean sight line. "Options," Hayes said. Reed was quiet for a long moment. "I can try the western ridge. I'd need to reposition completely. 40 minutes maybe." "We don't have 40 minutes. Then I can try a partial exposure shot. If the target moves into the gap." "And if they don't?" Reed didn't answer. The silence said everything. Cho started working the angles on his pad, trying to find a geometry that Reed hadn't already ruled out. The team held its position. The 2-hour window was ticking. Hayes stood up and turned around and found Ava Bennett standing directly behind him. She was not looking at the target. She was not looking at the map on Cho's pad. She was looking at the ground between the forward position and the rock formation on the eastern side of the valley, the side with the wind funnel, the side nobody used. He watched her eyes track something he couldn't see. "Bennett," he said quietly. She looked at him. "You're observing," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a reminder. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said just as quietly, "I know." She turned back toward the eastern approach. He waited. A minute passed. Maybe 2. Reed was still working the western ridge option, talking quietly with Cho about the repositioning route, doing the math on whether 40 minutes could be compressed. Then Ava spoke. "Commander." Her voice was so low that only Hayes could hear it. "I need to show you something." He moved beside her. She pointed not at the target, but at the terrain between them and the eastern rock formation. She traced a line with her finger following something he couldn't see. "The drainage channel runs under the surface here," she said. "The ground is depressed maybe 12 centimeters. You can see the vegetation difference." She moved her finger. "That's a natural windbreak. The compression zone Kowalski described starts about 30 meters past that point. But 30 meters before it?" She stopped. "The air is still." Hayes looked at where she was pointing. He couldn't see what she was describing, but he understood what she was telling him. "There's a window," he said. "There's a window," she confirmed. "It's 8 inches wide at 430 meters. The target crosses it every 90 seconds based on the movement pattern from the last 20 minutes. She looked at him. "I've been timing it." Hayes stared at her. He looked at the eastern approach. Then he looked at Marcus Reed, who was still working the western ridge option with disciplined focus. Then he looked back at Ava. "That's not a shot anyone takes," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. "You need the rifle," he said. She didn't answer. She just looked at him. Hayes stood there with the weight of the moment pressing down on him, and he was aware, sharply, uncomfortably aware, that he was standing at the intersection of 2 things: the rule he had made, which was reasonable and justified, and the situation he was looking at, which had moved beyond reasonable. He had been wrong about people before. Not often. But the cost of being wrong here was not a bruised professional assessment. The cost of being wrong here if this had been a real operation, would have been counted in a different kind of number. He looked at the eastern approach one more time. Then he made the call that would define everything that came after. "Read," he said. Marcus looked over his shoulder. "Stand down. Bennett takes the shot." The silence that followed was absolute. Reed's face moved through something complicated. Disbelief, professional instinct, the specific injury of being set aside. Then he looked at Ava. Really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. And he did something that cost him something to do. He moved away from the position. Ava knelt beside the rifle. She didn't pick it up immediately. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Hayes counted because he was watching, and then she opened them and took the rifle and settled into the position like she had been there for hours. Nobody spoke. She found the eastern approach. She followed the channel Ava had traced with her finger. She reached the point she had described 30 meters before the compression zone, and she stopped moving. Her breathing went quiet. Her hands went still. And then Hayes understood something he hadn't understood before. He had been watching her all day, watching her check the sky, watching her clock, the target movement, watching her study the drainage channel, and he had been cataloging it as behavior he didn't understand. Eccentricity. Preparation theater. But it wasn't preparation theater. It was the thing itself. She had been shooting since she arrived. She had been calculating every variable reading, every piece of terrain, adjusting every figure in her mind. And now all of that work was coming to its conclusion, and the only new thing happening in this moment was that her finger was on the trigger. The rest of it was already done. The target moved into the 8-inch window. Ava fired. 1 shot. The valley answered with silence, and then with the low echo of the shot rolling across the mountains, and then with silence again. And then Cho's voice checking the target position through his glass. "Hit," he said. "Confirmed hit." Nobody moved for a long moment. Hayes looked at Marcus Reed. Reed was staring at the position Ava had fired from. He was doing the geometry in his head. Hayes could see him doing it, calculating the angle and the wind and the distance and the 8-inch gap, running it through 17 years of knowledge and experience. He came back from wherever that calculation had taken him. He looked at Hayes. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Ava stood up from the position. She handled the rifle with the same economy she handled everything. No drama, no display. She checked the chamber and gauged the safety and held it out toward Hayes. He looked at the rifle. Then he looked at her. "Keep it," he said. "We'll talk about the rest when we're back." She didn't smile. But something in her face settled, not relief exactly, but something like the absence of a weight she'd been carrying since the moment she walked into this facility. She slung the rifle over her shoulder and turned toward the extraction route. Around her, the team started moving. Quietly. Without commentary. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but is instead completely full. Full of the thing that just happened. Full of the revision it required, full of the 12 separate calculations. Each of them was running about what they had just seen and what it meant. Kowalski fell into step beside her. "Captain," he said. "Kowalski. That was the eastern approach." "Yes." "You said shots always go left." "They do," she said. "But only past a certain point. Before that point." She looked at him. "You gave me the window. You just didn't know it." He thought about that for the rest of the hike back. And Hayes walked at the rear of the formation, watching the mountain, watching his team, watching the woman who had come here with a thin file and a locked rifle case. And he thought about what it meant to be wrong about a person and what it cost, and whether the cost was ever small enough to ignore. He didn't think it was. He had never thought that. But he had let himself act like he did. That was the thing he was going to have to answer for. Not to her. Not publicly. To himself. Because in his experience, and he had more of it than almost anyone in this facility, the most dangerous place a leader could live was inside the certainty that they already knew what they were looking at. He had looked at Ava Bennett and seen something he recognized. He had been wrong about what he recognized. And somewhere behind that thin file in the classified records he couldn't access, there was a story that had made her exactly what she was, and that story was still unfinished, and it was going to matter, and he had a feeling he was only now beginning to understand how much. The mountain watched them leave. The echo had long since died, but the silence it left behind was the kind that changed things. Nobody debriefed on the hike back. That was the first thing Hayes noticed. Normally, after an exercise, good or bad, the team talked. They processed. They argued about angles and timing and decisions the way operators always did, because the conversation was part of how the work got done. It was how lessons moved from one person's experience into the group's muscle memory. This time, nobody said a word. 12 operators, 4 kilometers of mountain trail, and the only sounds were boots on frozen ground and the wind moving through the ridgeline above them. Ava walked in the middle of the formation, carrying the rifle Hayes had told her to keep, and the silence around her was not hostile. It was something more complicated than that. It was the silence of people who were revising something fundamental and hadn't finished yet. Hayes knew that silence. He'd heard it before on the far side of moments that changed what a unit believed about itself. He let it breathe. They reached the staging area at 13:47, 13 minutes ahead of the extraction window, and the team broke formation without orders, gear checks, equipment storage, the automatic choreography of post-exercise routine. Hayes watched Marcus Reed walk directly to the equipment bench and begin breaking down his kit with the focused precision of a man who needed something to do with his hands. He watched Ava set the rifle on the table beside her bag and start going through the trauma kit she'd carried for 4 kilometers without needing to use. He watched Kowalski watching Ava. He watched Cho watching Reed. He gave them 7 minutes. Then he called it. Formation, he said. Now. They assembled in the main room, the same room where Ava had walked through the door 36 hours ago and held her ground against his first read of her. Same walls, same layout, different air. Hayes stood in front of them and said nothing for a moment. He looked at his team. He looked at Ava, who was standing at the left end of the line with the same expression she'd had every time he'd looked at her, present, contained, not asking for anything. What just happened up there, he said, is going to get discussed. Formally in the after-action and informally probably tonight. I'm not going to get ahead of that conversation, but I'm going to say one thing before it starts. He paused. Captain Bennett identified a shooting solution that none of us found. She identified it before we reached the target area. She identified it using information she gathered over the previous 48 hours, and she identified it without a rifle in her hands, which was the condition I imposed. He looked at the team. That is not luck. That is not beginner's advantage. That is work applied correctly to a specific problem. He looked at Ava. You'll have your formal review. We'll start it tomorrow. She nodded once. Dismissed, he said. Reed, stay. The room emptied. Cho was the last one out, and he closed the door behind him with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight of what was happening inside. Hayes turned to face Marcus Reed. Reed was already looking at him, arms at his sides, jaw set, the posture of a man who had decided to receive whatever was coming without flinching. Tell me what you're thinking, Hayes said. I'm thinking, Reed said slowly, that the shot she took was not a shot I would have taken. Because you couldn't make it. Reed was quiet for a long moment. That was its own answer, and they both knew it. Marcus Reed did not admit limitation easily. The fact that he was considering it at all said more than any sentence could. Because I wouldn't have seen it, Reed said finally. The eastern approach, I walked past that channel 3 times. I've done this exercise 6 times on this mountain. I've never once looked at that drainage channel as a shooting position. Why not? Because the wind makes it impossible. Bennett said it doesn't. Not at that specific point. I know what she said. Reed's voice was flat. I've been doing the math since she fired. She's right. There's a 12-meter window inside the compression zone where the surface topography creates a buffer. I've been on that mountain 30 times and I never saw it. He looked at Hayes. She saw it in 48 hours. Hayes waited. I don't know what to do with that, Reed said. It came out quietly without armor. I'm not going to pretend I do. You don't have to do anything with it tonight, Hayes said. But you are going to be the person who helps me figure out what she actually is. Because whatever that file says, it's not the whole story. Reed looked at him. You think there's more? I think there's considerably more, Hayes said. And I think it's the kind of more that matters. Reed was quiet for another moment. Then he nodded a single deliberate motion that cost him something to make. I'll talk to her, he said. Not as an evaluation, Hayes said. As a conversation. Understood. Hayes picked up his field jacket from the chair beside him. Reed, he said. Sir? She didn't make you look bad up there. Reed looked at the floor. Then he looked up. No, he said. She made me look accurate, which is worse. Hayes almost smiled. He didn't let it land. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow starts early. What Hayes didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that Ava Bennett hadn't slept the night before the exercise. Not because she was anxious. Not because she was running the calculations again, though she was. She hadn't slept because she had found something in the pre-mission briefing materials that didn't fit. It was small. The kind of small that most people would read past file as a data entry error and move on from. A coordinate discrepancy in the historical mission logs. The target installation position listed in the current exercise brief didn't match the position logged from the last 3 iterations of the same exercise. The variance was 40 meters, lateral, to the left. She had looked at that discrepancy for a long time. Then she had pulled the individual operator logs from those 3 exercises, the after-action reports, the environmental notes, the equipment checklists, and she had compared them to the current brief. And what she found was that the discrepancy wasn't random. It wasn't administrative drift. The installation had been moved, deliberately recently and without notation in the public briefing materials. Someone had modified the exercise. She didn't know who. She didn't know why. And she had no standing, no authority, no established credibility, no relationship with anyone in the facility to raise it as a concern, without it looking like exactly what Hayes already suspected, a young captain with a thin file trying to establish herself through noise. So she had said nothing. She had instead spent the night mapping the implications. If the installation was moved, the primary shooting solution was gone. The team would reach the target area and find a problem they hadn't prepared for. And she had exactly one option: that the changed position didn't eliminate the eastern approach. The channel, the 12-meter window that nobody else knew existed. She had prepared for the thing that wasn't supposed to happen, not because she had known it would happen. Because she had learned in a way that had cost her everything once that the thing that isn't supposed to happen is the only thing you can never afford to be unprepared for. The mission that made her a sniper had started exactly the same way. A coordinate discrepancy. An installation that wasn't where the brief said it would be. A team that trusted the plan more than the ground beneath their feet. She had trusted the plan that day too. She didn't anymore. The formal review began the following morning at 0800 in Hayes's office with a military intelligence officer named Major Sandra Voss, present via secure video from a facility in Virginia that Hayes couldn't name out loud. Voss was 51 years old, had the kind of face that had learned to reveal exactly nothing, and had been the classification authority on Ava's service record for the past 4 years. Hayes had requested the review. Voss had agreed to it more quickly than he'd expected, which told him something. Ava sat across the table from Hayes with a cup of coffee. She wasn't drinking, and her hands folded in her lap, and waited. I'm going to walk you through what we can release, Voss said from the screen. Captain Bennett, you can supplement where you're comfortable. Commander Hayes, what you're about to hear does not leave this room. Understood, Hayes said. 3 years ago, Voss began. Captain Bennett was a combat rescue specialist attached to a classified joint task force operating in a forward environment I'm not going to name. Her unit was tasked with a recovery operation personnel extraction, non-permissive environment. The intelligence package placed the target location at a specific set of coordinates. She paused. The intelligence was wrong by 40 meters. The coordinates in the package had been modified between the last verification checkpoint and the operational brief. The discrepancy was small enough that it wasn't caught in the standard review. The team deployed on the original package. Hayes looked at Ava. Ava was looking at the table. The team reached the target location and found the environment non-viable. Voss continued. By the time they adapted and relocated, they were outside their extraction window. 2 of the 5 team members were lost. Another pause. One of them was Captain Bennett's direct partner, a specialist she had worked with for 3 years. The room was very quiet. Captain Bennett survived and extracted with the remaining 2 team members. She spent the following 3 months on medical leave, during which she submitted a formal analysis of the mission failure to the Task Force Intelligence Office. Voss looked at something off-screen. The analysis was 47 pages long. It identified the coordinate discrepancy, traced the modification pathway through the intelligence system, and proposed 3 potential explanations. Administrative error, system corruption, or deliberate manipulation. Hayes leaned forward slightly. "Which one was it?" he asked. Voss looked at him. "That investigation is ongoing," she said. The silence that followed was not comfortable. Hayes looked at Ava. "You knew the installation was moved," he said. "Yesterday, before we went up the mountain." She looked up from the table. She met his eyes. "I found the discrepancy in the exercise logs," she said. 40 meters, lateral." Hayes sat back in his chair slowly. "You didn't tell me." "I had no standing to tell you anything," she said. "You'd already decided what I was. If I'd come to you with a coordinate discrepancy in an exercise brief, you would have told me I was looking for problems that didn't exist." He wanted to say she was wrong. He couldn't. "So you prepared for it instead," he said. "I prepared for the thing the changed position would cause," she said. "The blocked shooting solution. The need for an alternative approach." "Yes." "And the Eastern Channel was the only alternative approach the modification left available." She paused. "I found it on the maps the night I arrived." Hayes thought about 48 hours of silence. He thought about a woman sitting on a floor with 3 maps spread in front of her at 0130, asking a specialist about wind behavior in a drainage channel she had no reason to know existed. He thought about the cost of being wrong about what preparation looked like. "The coordinate discrepancy in your exercise brief," he said carefully. "Do you think it was deliberate?" Ava looked at him for a long moment. "I think it was consistent with what I've seen before," she said. "Which is not the same as saying it was deliberate. I'm not making that accusation." Her hands, which had been very still on the table, shifted slightly. "But I'm not dismissing it either." Hayes looked at Voss on the screen. Voss's expression had not changed. "Major," Hayes said, "is there something I should know about the reason Captain Bennett was posted to this facility specifically?" Voss was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "The posting was Captain Bennett's request," she said. "I approved it." "Why did she request it?" Another 4 seconds. "Because Voss said the intelligence package from the original mission, the one with the coordinate modification, contained a routing tag that traces back to a system used by this facility during a joint training operation 18 months ago." Hayes felt the air in the room change. He looked at Ava. She looked back at him without expression. "You came here," he said slowly, "because you think the modification in your mission package originated here." "I came here," she said, "because the evidence pointed here. I didn't know what I'd find. I still don't." She held his gaze. "I'm not accusing anyone in this unit. I'm following the only thread I have." Hayes put both hands flat on the table. He looked at Voss. He looked at Ava. He looked at the door of his office, which was closed, behind which 12 operators were beginning their morning routine, one of whom may or may not have been connected to a mission failure 3 years ago that had killed 2 people and changed the woman sitting in front of him into something he hadn't been able to recognize. "What do you need from me?" he said. Ava's shoulders came down a fraction of an inch. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. But Hayes was paying close attention. "Access to the facility's routing logs from the 18-month window," she said, "and your discretion." "You'll have both," he said. Marcus Reed found her in the equipment room at 1400 running maintenance on the rifle Hayes had told her to keep. It was the kind of detailed, unhurried work that meant either she had nothing else to do or she was thinking about something she didn't want to think about in a room with other people watching. He pulled up a chair without asking and sat down across from her. She kept working. Kowalski told me about the drainage channel, Reed said. The conversation the night before the exercise. I know he did, she said. You asked him about wind behavior. Yes. You already knew about the compression zone. I knew about the theory of it. He confirmed the practical behavior. She looked up briefly. He was helpful. Reed watched her hands on the rifle. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, not performing it, not demonstrating it, just doing it the way breathing happened. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to know I'm asking it as a straight question, not as a challenge. She stopped working. She looked at him. The shot you took yesterday, he said. Had you made that shot before that specific configuration, the gap, the distance, the angle? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Not that configuration exactly, she said. But I've worked inside compression zones before. I know how the air behaves at the boundary. She paused. The mathematics of it aren't unique. The application was. Where did you learn to read compression zones? She looked at him steadily. From the mission that went wrong, she said. Reed absorbed that. He let it sit for a moment before he spoke again. The specialist you lost, he said carefully. The one in your partner position. Jamie, she said. His name came out clean and direct the way. People say the names of the dead when they've said them enough times to have made peace with the saying of it. Jamie Croft. I'm sorry, Reed said. Thank you. Was Jamie a sniper? No, Jamie was a rescue specialist, same as me. She picked up the cleaning cloth and resumed the work. When the target location was wrong, we were moving through an unsecured area, trying to find the correct position. Jamie was covering our approach. The coverage failed because we were in the wrong place. Reed was quiet. If someone had made the right shot from the right position, Ava said, at the right moment the approach would have been covered. The timeline would have held. The extraction would have worked. She set down the cloth. After I spent 3 months thinking about what the right shot would have looked like, what angle, what distance, what variables, I built the entire scenario in my head, and I worked it until I knew what it would have taken to change the outcome. She looked at Reed. And then I learned how to make that shot, she said. Not because I wanted to be a sniper, because I didn't want to be in that position again where someone died because the coverage wasn't there. Reed looked at her for a long time. The shot yesterday wasn't the hardest shot you've ever made, he said. It wasn't a question. No, she said. What was? She looked at him. The first one. After Jamie. She picked up the rifle and checked the chamber one final time. The first time I was in a position where my coverage could actually change what happened to someone else. Did it work? Yes. And the 3 confirmed kills in your record? Yes. Reed sat back in his chair. He was running something through his head. She could see it in the small adjustments of his expression, the way his eyes moved without focusing on anything specific. She let him run it. I owe you an apology, he said finally. No, she said. I told Hayes that experience was what made a shooter real, in front of the team. You were making an accurate point about the general case, she said. I'm not the general case. That's not an excuse for Reed. She said his name quietly, but with enough weight to stop him. You were working from what you knew. So was he. So was everyone in that room. That's not something you apologize for. That's something you correct when you have new information. She met his eyes. You corrected it on the mountain. That's what actually matters. Reed studied her. You've had this conversation before, he said. Versions of it, she said. Yes. Does it get easier? She thought about it. No, she said, but it gets faster. He almost laughed. He didn't quite make it, but something in his face opened slightly the way faces do when a tension they've been carrying gets named and doesn't detonate. Hayes told me to talk to you as a conversation, he said. He told me the same thing, she said. Did he? He said I'd have my formal review. He said we'd talk tomorrow. His tone said he meant something more than administrative process. She looked at Reed. I think he wanted to know whether I was a person his team could work with, or whether I was only a capability they could use. And what's the difference? People you work with know your name, she said. Capabilities don't need to. Reed was quiet. For what it's worth, he said, I'm Marcus. She looked at him. I know, she said. I read everyone's file before I came. He stared at her. You read our files. You had access to mine, she said. Seemed fair. We had access to a folder with 3 lines in it and a redaction notice. Yes, she said. That was fair too. He shook his head slowly. The expression on his face was the one people made when they couldn't quite decide whether to be irritated or impressed, and the decision kept flipping back and forth too fast to land. What did my file say? He asked. 17 years, 114 confirmed. Qualified expert in 9 documented environments. Twice recommended for instructor cadre, twice declined. She paused. Personal notes section was empty. He looked at her. Most people don't read that far, he said. I know, she said. The empty sections are where the actual information lives. He looked at the empty personal notes in his own memory, the space where he'd chosen not to write anything year after year, because the things worth saying in that space were not things he'd wanted to commit to paper. What did the empty tell you? He asked. That you've been doing this long enough that you stopped needing it to mean something to anyone but you, she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. Reed looked at the wall. He looked at the rifle in her hands. He looked at the door. The coordinate discrepancy, he said, in the exercise brief. She went very still. Hayes told you, she said. Hayes trusts me, he said. Whether or not that trust is correctly placed is, I imagine, partly what you're here to determine. She looked at him for a long moment. If you're the person who modified that brief, she said, then you're also the person who modified the intelligence package 3 years ago. And that means you were in the room when the decision was made to send 5 people into a non-viable location. Her voice was completely level. So if that's true, I would like you to tell me, right now, before this goes any further. The room held its breath. Reed looked at her. His jaw was tight. His hands were still. I didn't modify the brief, he said. I know, she said. He blinked. You know. Your file says you were on assignment in Norway during the operational window when my mission package was compiled. I checked before I sat down. She held his gaze. I'm not here to suspect everyone. I'm here to eliminate people until I find the one who was actually there. Reed exhaled. It was controlled, but barely. Then why tell me about it, he said. Because I need someone who knows this mountain and this unit to help me read what I find in those routing logs, she said. And because Hayes trusts you. And because you moved out of my position on the mountain yesterday when he told you to, and you didn't make me pay for it afterward. She paused. Those are 3 reasons. That's enough. Reed looked at her for a long moment. What are we looking for? He said. A name, she said. Just a name. She set the rifle down on the table between them. Someone in this unit sent a mission package with the wrong coordinates, she said. 2 people died because of it. And whoever it was has been here long enough to still be here because the routing tag in my package wasn't historical. It was active. She looked at him steadily. Which means they've been watching this investigation since before I walked through that door. Reed looked at the rifle. He looked at Ava. I thought about the Eastern Channel, and the 12-meter window, and the 8-inch gap, and the one shot that shouldn't have been possible, and somehow was. He thought about what it meant that she had prepared for the thing that wasn't supposed to happen. And he thought about the person in this facility who had been banking on the fact that nobody would. When do we start? He said. Ava picked up the rifle. We already did, she said. The routing logs arrived at 0600 the next morning, delivered through a secure transfer that Major Voss had authorized overnight. Hayes printed nothing. He kept it entirely digital access, restricted to 3 terminals, his office, the secure communications room, and a laptop he handed to Ava, without ceremony and without explanation to anyone watching. She had the first pass done by 0900. What she found was not a confession. It was never going to be that simple, and she had known that before she started. What she found was a pattern, the kind of pattern that only became visible when you looked at enough data points across enough time and stopped expecting the answer to announce itself. The routing tag she had traced from her original mission package ran through a relay node that the facility used for inter-unit communication. That much she had already known. What she hadn't known, what the logs now made visible, was that the same relay node had been accessed using a secondary authentication credential on 3 separate occasions in the past 18 months. Not the same credential each time, different ones. But each access had occurred during a window when only a limited number of personnel had been inside the facility, and each access had routed through the same terminal. Terminal 7. Communications Bay. East Corridor. She closed the laptop and sat with that information for a full minute before she said anything. Then she picked up the radio Hayes had assigned her and said, "I need Reed, now." He was there in 4 minutes. She showed him the logs without preamble. He read through them twice, which she had already learned was his method, once for comprehension, once for the thing comprehension missed the first time. 3 accesses, he said. 3 different credentials, she said. All legitimate, all belonging to people who were verified to be elsewhere during the access window. Reed looked up from the screen. Someone borrowed their credentials, or duplicated them, she said. Which is harder, but not impossible, if you have enough facility access and enough time. That narrows it significantly, Reed said. It narrows it to people who've been here long enough to have built access systematically, she said. Which means we're not looking for a recent arrival. She held his gaze. We're looking for someone established, trusted, someone nobody would look at twice. Reed was quiet. She watched his face move through the calculation. The same calculation she'd been running since 0600, the one where you took the profile she'd just described and held it against every face you knew in this building and tried to feel whether any of them fit. Hayes, he said. Not an accusation, a question. Hayes has the access, she said. He doesn't have a connection to the original mission package. His service record doesn't intersect with the task force at any point during the operational window. She paused. And he gave me the routing logs. If he were the person giving me the logs, was a significant miscalculation. Unless he gave you the logs because he was confident they wouldn't point to him. I considered that, she said. It's possible, but the access pattern doesn't fit his movement record. He was in Virginia on 2 of the 3 dates. Reed nodded slowly. Then who? I need the individual movement logs for the full facility roster. Every person who was present on those 3 dates. That's going to require Hayes to pull personnel files. I know. He's going to ask why. Tell him I found something in the routing data, she said. Tell him it's specific enough that I need the personnel overlap to confirm it. Tell him I'm not naming anyone yet. Reed looked at her. Are you naming anyone yet? He said. She looked back at him. I have a hypothesis, she said. I'm not sharing it until I'm certain, because if I'm wrong, I destroy something I can't rebuild. And if I'm right? She stopped. If I'm right, I need the evidence to be clean, untouchable, the kind of thing that ends it completely. Reed held her gaze for another moment. Then he stood. I'll talk to Hayes, he said. He was at the door when she spoke again. Marcus. He stopped. The access pattern, the timing of all 3 incidents, it correlates with exercise planning windows, specifically the 2-week period before major training rotations when briefing materials are compiled and distributed. She let that land. Whoever this is, they're not operating opportunistically. They're operating systematically. They've been doing it long enough to know exactly when the system is most vulnerable. Reed stood in the doorway without moving. That means, he said slowly, that whatever happened to your team 3 years ago wasn't the first time. No, she said. I don't think it was. He left. She opened the laptop again and started on the second pass. Hayes pulled the movement logs inside of an hour, which told Ava that Reed had explained it with enough precision that Hayes understood the stakes without being told them explicitly. He delivered the files to her personally, sat down across from her and said, Tell me what you're looking at. I'm looking at who was here on 3 specific dates, she said, and who had access to Terminal 7 in the communications bay. Hayes looked at the dates she showed him. Something moved across his face, something small and quick, the kind of involuntary response that happened before a person's training caught up with their instincts and shut it down. "What?" she said. He looked at her. "Nothing." "Commander?" Her voice was level. "If you recognize those dates, I need to know why." He was quiet for a moment. "The second date," he said finally. "That's the day we had a security audit. External review team came in from Washington. We had elevated access protocols in place. The audit generated a lot of system traffic. It would have been a reasonable window to move something inside the noise." Ava looked at the log for the second access. The timestamp was 1347. "What time did the audit team arrive?" she said. "Around noon," Hayes said. "They were in the building until 1800. Who coordinated the audit on your end internally?" Hayes opened his mouth. He closed it. He said a name. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Ava kept her face completely still. "He coordinated all 3 audits in the past 2 years, Hayes said. His voice had gone careful and quiet the way voices went when a person was managing something they hadn't been prepared for. External and internal both. It's his area, administrative oversight facility compliance. He's been the primary contact for every external review we've had since he was promoted." "When was he promoted?" Ava said. Hayes looked at her. 22 months ago, he said. She pulled up the log for the first access. The timestamp placed it 23 months ago, 1 month before the promotion. "He was building the access before he had the authority to legitimize it," she said. Hayes stood up from his chair. He walked to the wall and stood there with his back to her for a moment. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the specific tension of a person who was revising something they had built their professional trust around and feeling the revision crack something they hadn't known was load-bearing. "Lieutenant Colonel Warren has been in this unit for 9 years, Hayes said. "He was here before me." "I know," she said. "How was the one who pushed to establish the joint intelligence relay that the routing node runs through?" She said nothing. "He built the system," Hayes said. He turned around. His face was controlled, but only barely. "He built the system, and then he used it." "That's my hypothesis," she said. "I don't have confirmation yet. The movement logs will either place him at Terminal 7 on those dates, or they won't. If they do, that's the confirmation I need to take this to Voss." Hayes sat back down. "Why Voss?" he said. "Why not through standard channels?" "Because standard channels in this facility run through Warren's administrative oversight," she said. "If I go through standard channels, I go through him." Hayes looked at his hands on the table. "I've had dinner at that man's house," he said. "His daughter was in my wife's reading group." "I know that's hard," she said. "Don't." He stopped, took a breath, reset. "I'm not asking for sympathy, I'm processing. Take the time you need," she said. "But I need to know whether you're with me on this before I go further." He looked at her. "If I wasn't with you on this," he said, "I wouldn't have pulled the movement logs." She nodded. He looked at the laptop. "Pull them," he said. "Let's find out." The movement logs placed Lieutenant Colonel David Warren inside the facility on all 3 dates. That alone was not remarkable. He worked there. But the logs were granular, they tracked access by keycard, and the keycard data showed Warren's card accessing the East Corridor twice on the second date, both times outside his normal operational area, both times within 20 minutes of the flagged terminal access. Ava looked at that data for a long time. Then she looked at something else. The routing tag from her original mission package, the one that had led her here, had been created using an authentication credential, belonging to a specialist named Rodriguez, who had separated from the unit 16 months ago. Rodriguez had been under Warren's direct administrative authority, and the credential, which should have been deactivated upon separation, had remained active in the system for 11 months after Rodriguez left. 11 months, during which anyone with access to Warren's administrative files could have used it. She pulled Rodriguez's separation paperwork. The deactivation order had been filed. On time. Correctly formatted. signed by Warren. But the credential hadn't been deactivated until 4 months after the order was filed. 4 months of active access on a dead credential on a system Warren had built and understood better than anyone else in the facility. She sat back. She had worked with enough intelligence analysts over the years to understand the difference between circumstantial convergence and structural evidence. What she had right now was the latter. Not because any single piece was definitive, but because the architecture of it was too coherent to be accidental. You didn't get this particular configuration of timing access credential management and system knowledge from a series of unrelated errors. You got it from a person who knew exactly what they were doing and had been doing it long enough to get comfortable. Comfort was always where they made mistakes. She picked up the radio. "Hayes," she said, "I need you to arrange a meeting. Just you, me, and Warren. Nothing formal. Don't tell him what it's about." A pause. "When?" Hayes said. "This afternoon," she said. "Before he has time to run anything overnight." Another pause. Longer. "Understood," Hayes said. She spent the 2 hours before the meeting doing something nobody expected her to do. She went to the range, not to practice, not to run through drills. She took the rifle Hayes had given her, she found an empty lane, and she shot 50 rounds at a standard target from 200 meters, with the kind of deliberate, unhurried precision that had nothing to do with the target and everything to do with the thinking. This was how she worked. She had learned it by accident years ago, that the mechanical repetition of the physical work cleared a specific kind of noise from her mind. The noise of wanting to be right. The noise of being afraid of what right would cost. She was afraid now, not of Warren, not of the confrontation ahead. She was afraid of what it meant to be right about this, to walk into that room and lay out 3 years of evidence and watch a 9-year career collapse under the weight of what a man had chosen to do with the power he'd been given. She was afraid of what it would cost Hayes. Who had dinner at that man's house? Whose wife's reading group had included that man's daughter? She was afraid that being right was still not the same as being done. Because done meant someone had to answer for Jamie. And no amount of evidence changed what had already happened. 47 rounds. 48. She thought about Jamie Croft. The way she always thought about Jamie. Not with grief, not anymore, but with the specific accountability of the living toward the dead. The promise she had made. The shape of what that promise required. 49. 50. She cleared the rifle, checked the chamber, and walked back inside. Warren was already in the room when she arrived. He was 54 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of institutional authority that had become so habitual it was indistinguishable from his natural bearing. He sat across from Hayes with his hands on the table and a mildly curious expression that was entirely professional and entirely performance. He looked at Ava when she walked in. "Captain Bennett," he said. "I've heard good things." She sat down across from him. "Colonel Warren," she said, "thank you for making time. Lucas said you had something to discuss about the routing infrastructure." He spread his hands slightly. "Happy to help. It's a complex system. I know it can be confusing for people who aren't familiar with it." "It is complex," she said. "You built it well." He smiled. The smile was warm, practiced, and completely empty. "We needed something robust," he said. "The old relay architecture had too many vulnerability points. The new system closed most of them." "Most," she said. He looked at her. "Technology is never perfect, Captain." "No," she said. "But administrative oversight can compensate for technical imperfection. That's why the credential management protocol exists." She opened the laptop. "I wanted to walk you through something I found in the routing logs." She turned the screen toward him. He looked at it. His expression didn't change. That was the tell, not a flinch, not a flicker, but the very controlled absence of any reaction at all from a man who should have had one, even a professional one, even a measured one. People looked at data and responded to it. That was what people did. He looked at it and became more still. "These access events," she said. 3 dates. Secondary credentials. Terminal 7. She let that sit. "I spent yesterday tracing the authentication pathway. The credential used in the second access belonged to Specialist Rodriguez. Rodriguez separated 16 months ago, Warren said. His voice was perfectly steady. His credentials would have been deactivated at separation. They were filed for deactivation, she said. The order is in the system, signed by you. She pulled up the document. But the credential remained active for 11 months after the order was filed. He looked at the document. Administrative error, he said. The deactivation queue had a processing backlog during that period. I can pull the system records. I already pulled them, she said. The backlog affected 14 other credentials during the same period. Average delay 4 days. The Rodriguez credential delay was 11 months. The room was very quiet. Hayes hadn't moved since she walked in. He was sitting to her left, his hands flat on the table, his face doing the work of staying controlled. Warren looked at the laptop. He looked at Hayes. He looked at Ava. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, he said. I'm not suggesting anything, she said. I'm showing you data and asking you to explain it. I just did explain it. The explanation doesn't account for the 11-month variance. He sat back in his chair slightly. The movement was small, barely an inch, but it was the first break in his absolute physical control, and she had been waiting for it. Captain, he said, I appreciate the thoroughness, but I've been running administrative oversight in this facility for 2 years. The complexity of the systems I manage is, Colonel, she said it quietly. I want to talk to you about a mission that took place 3 years ago. A recovery operation, 5-person team, forward non-permissive environment. The color in his face changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it happened in films. Just a small specific shift, the kind that happened when blood did. What blood did, when the body responded to a threat before the mind had finished deciding how to handle it. I don't know what mission you're referring to, he said. The intelligence package for that operation contained a coordinate modification, she said. The target installation was placed 40 meters from its actual position. The discrepancy was introduced between the last verification checkpoint and the operational brief. The modification was routed through this facility's relay node. She held his gaze. Using a credential belonging to someone who was not present on the date of modification. Warren's hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, shifted. A small adjustment. His left thumb pressed against the table surface. That's a serious allegation, he said. It's a data point, she said. Would you like to see the routing log? He didn't answer. She turned the laptop toward him and showed him the log from 3 years ago. She had pulled it from that morning before the movement logs arrived, had requested it without explaining why, because Voss had understood without being told. Warren looked at the screen. He looked at it for a long time, and in that long time, Hayes watched the thing happen that he had been dreading since the moment Ava had said the name. He watched 9 years of professional trust go through its own kind of coordinate check and find that the installation wasn't where the record said it was. I want legal counsel, Warren said. His voice was different. The warmth was gone. The practiced ease was gone. What was left was the voice of a man who had just made the calculation and understood what the answer was. That's your right, Ava said. She closed the laptop. But before counsel arrives, there's one thing I want you to understand. She looked at him directly. 2 people died on that operation, she said. One of them was my partner. His name was Jamie Croft. He was 31 years old. He had a sister in Portland and a dog he was planning to bring home when his contract ended. She didn't look away. I spent 3 years following the thread that led to this room. I followed it because someone needed to, and because Jamie deserved someone who would. Warren said nothing. You're going to have counsel, she said. You're going to have due process. You're going to have every protection the system provides. Those things are right, and I'm not asking for them to be otherwise. She stood up. But I want you to understand that the data is complete. The routing logs, the credential records, the access pattern, the timing correlation, all of it is documented, all of it is clean, and all of it is already with Major Voss. She paused. There is no version of this where the evidence doesn't hold. Warren looked at the table. He looked like something had gone out of him. Not guilt, not remorse, not yet. but the particular energy of a person who has been managing a long deception and has finally reached the point where the management cost exceeds anything the deception was worth. The exhaustion of it. The relief of it almost in the ugly way that relief sometimes lived inside defeat. The operation wasn't supposed to go wrong, he said. Hayes made a sound small involuntary. Then why did you modify the coordinates? Ava said. Warren looked at the table. There was an asset in the target location, a source I'd been running for 2 years. If the team went in clean... He stopped. The extraction would have burned the asset. I needed to redirect the approach by 40 meters to create a window for the asset to move before contact. The silence that followed was absolute. Ava looked at him. You modified the intelligence package, she said, to protect a source. Yes. Without authorization. Yes. Without informing the team. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. Did the asset survive? She said. He looked up at her. Something in his face broke slightly, a small, honest fracture. No, he said. He was extracted 3 days later. He died in transit. Hayes stood up. He walked to the wall and stood there the same way he'd stood in Ava's office with his back to the room, managing something that needed managing before it came out wrong. Ava looked at Warren. You redirected 5 people into a non-viable position, she said, to protect a source who died anyway, and 2 members of that team died because of the redirect. He didn't say anything. Did you know the position was non-viable? She said. The risk assessment said, did you know? A pause. I knew it increased the risk, he said. I didn't believe it would go the way it did. She nodded once. That, she said, is what you're going to have to live with. Whatever happens in the proceedings, whatever counsel negotiates, whatever the outcome is, that specific thing is yours. She picked up the laptop. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here because someone needed to close the file. She looked at him one final time. The file is closed. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. For what it's worth, she said without turning around. I understand what it is to make a decision you believe is right and watch it become something else entirely. Her voice was quiet and steady and completely without cruelty. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Hayes's voice, low controlled official, beginning the sequence of calls that would bring this to its formal conclusion. She heard him reach for the phone. She heard the door close. She walked down the corridor alone. She thought about Jamie. Not the way she usually thought about him. Not the accountability of it. Not the weight of the promise. Just Jamie. The way he laughed at things that weren't that funny and apologized for it immediately. The way he folded maps like they were something worth taking care of. The way he had looked at her in the last moment before the operation went wrong and said with complete confidence, "We're good. We've got this." They hadn't had it. But she had it now. She kept walking. Kowalski was coming the other way down the corridor. He saw her face and stopped. "Captain," he said. She looked at him. "Get some rest tonight," she said. "Tomorrow I want to show you something about reading wind patterns from topographic data. It's going to be useful for you." He blinked. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay. Is everything—" "Everything is exactly what it needs to be," she said. She walked past him toward the east wing. The corridor was quiet around her. The mountain was quiet beyond the walls. And somewhere in the weight of that quiet, something that had been pressing against the inside of her chest for 3 years shifted, not gone, not finished, nothing as clean as that, but different, looser. The way a wound felt when it had finally been treated properly, when the work of healing could start from a real foundation instead of a temporary one. She reached her room. She sat on the edge of the bunk. She picked up the photograph she kept in the front pocket of her field bag, the one she didn't show anyone, the one she carried because carrying it was the closest thing she had to an honest explanation for why she was still doing this. Jamie, grinning, holding up a map with a coffee stain on the corner. She looked at it for a while. "Closed," she said quietly. Then she set the photograph down and picked up her weather report. Tomorrow, she had work to do. The calls Hayes made that evening took 4 hours. Ava knew this because she was still awake at 0200 when she heard him walk past her door toward the east stairwell, the route that took him to the communications room, the one with the secure line. His footsteps were slow. Not the slow of exhaustion, though he was probably exhausted. The slow of a man carrying something and wasn't sure how. She didn't open her door. She sat on the edge of her bunk with her weather report in her hands, and she let him carry it because that was the only thing she could give him right now. The space to process it on his own terms, at his own pace, without her standing in the corridor, being the visible face of everything that had just collapsed. She understood what this felt like from the outside. She had watched it happen to people she cared about, the specific moment when the thing you trusted most turned out to have been wrong all along, and the question of what to do with everything you had built on top of that wrong thing became the only question in the room. You couldn't rush that. You could only be patient with it and stay close enough to be useful when the person came back. At 0230, she heard his footsteps come back the other way, slower this time. He stopped outside her door. A pause. He didn't knock. He kept walking. She looked at the weather report. She looked at the photograph on her bunk. She looked at the ceiling. She thought tomorrow is going to be harder than today. And today was the hardest day this unit had ever had. By 0700. The next morning, the word had moved through the facility, the way word always moved in small closed units. Not officially, not through any announcement, but through the invisible channels of people who lived and worked within 20 meters of each other and who could feel when something fundamental had shifted overnight. Nobody knew the specifics, but they knew Warren wasn't in the building. They knew Hayes had been on secure comms until past midnight. They knew Captain Bennett had gone directly from Hayes's office to her room without speaking to anyone, which was notable because Captain Bennett had only been here 4 days, and already everyone understood that when she moved with purpose, purpose was the right word for it. Kowalski found out at 065E from Cho, who had heard voices in the communications room at 0100 through a vent that everyone officially pretended didn't carry sound. Cho didn't have specifics either. But his face when he told Kowalski said that whatever he'd heard had been enough to understand that the landscape had changed. By the time formation assembled at 0800, the unit was running on the particular frequency of people who were waiting for something they didn't have the information to name. Hayes walked in and stood in front of them and said nothing for a moment. He looked like he hadn't slept. He had the controlled, deliberate posture of someone who had made the decision to lead before he'd finished grieving, because the leading needed to happen now, and the grieving could happen later. Ava stood at the left end of the line and watched him. Lieutenant Colonel Warren has been placed on administrative suspension, pending a formal investigation, Hayes said. I'm not going to discuss the specifics of what that investigation involves. What I will tell you is that it is serious, it is real, and it is being handled at a level above this facility. He looked across the line of faces. I know that creates questions. I'm not in a position to answer most of them right now. What I can tell you is that this unit continues its mission. This morning's training schedule is unchanged. You will do your jobs, you will do them well, and you will conduct yourselves with the professionalism that defines what this unit is. He paused. Questions. Silence. Then Cho spoke. Sir, he said, does this affect operational clearance? Pending review, Hayes said. For now, training operations continue as scheduled. Another silence. Then from the back of the room, a voice that belonged to Specialist Garrett, who was 25 and had been in the unit for 11 months and had the particular boldness of someone who hadn't yet learned when boldness was expensive. Sir, does this have anything to do with Captain Bennett? The room shifted. Hayes looked at Garrett for a long moment. Not with anger. With the specific patience of a person deciding how much truth the moment required. Captain Bennett, Hayes said, identified an intelligence irregularity that led to this investigation. She did her job. He looked at the full line. That's all any of us can do. He dismissed them. The room began to empty. Ava moved with the group because moving with the group was the right thing to do. Making herself invisible, not adding to whatever narrative was already forming in the spaces between people, not standing still in a way that invited approach. She almost made it to the door. Bennett. Hayes's voice. She stopped. Turned. The room had cleared. It was just the two of them. Hayes looked at her across the empty space. "I owe you an apology," he said. She opened her mouth. "Don't," he said. "Don't tell me I don't. I know what I said to you when you walked in here. I know what I assumed. And I know that you did what you came here to do, despite the fact that I made it as difficult as I reasonably could." He looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. "I was wrong about you." Ava looked at him. "You were working from what you had," she said. "That's what you said to Reed," he said. "It was generous when you said it to him. It's not quite enough when I say it to myself." He crossed his arms, not defensively, but like he needed something to hold on to. "Warren was my institutional North Star for 9 years. When someone is that embedded in what you trust, you stop checking them. You stop asking the questions you'd ask a newcomer." He looked at her. "You walked in here as a newcomer. I applied every check I would apply to anyone new, and I applied none of those checks to the person who had been here since before I arrived." She looked at him steadily. "That's how it works," she said. "It's how it always works. The threat isn't the person who looks wrong. It's the person who looks exactly right." "I know that," he said. "I've known that theoretically for 20 years. He looked at her. Knowing it and knowing what to do with it when it's standing in your own facility are apparently different things. She said nothing. She let him have that. "The investigation," he said. "Voss told me it's going to run minimum 6 months. Warren's counsel is already requesting discovery on the credential records." He looked at the window. "It's going to be ugly." "Yes," she said. "And the 2 people from your team, Jamie," she said, "and specialist Dre Paulson. Paulson's family was notified at the time that the cause was enemy contact. They've been living with that for 3 years." She looked at Hayes. "Part of what the investigation will address is whether the original notification was accurate." Hayes closed his eyes briefly. 3 years, he said. "Yes. And you've been carrying this alone for 3 years." She thought about how to answer that. "I've been carrying the thread," she said. "The weight is shared. It always was." She thought of Jamie's sister in Portland, Paulson's family, wherever they were, Major Voss, who had approved the posting and understood immediately what it meant. "I just happened to be the person who could follow it." Hayes looked at her for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" he said. "For the next phase. Whatever the investigation requires from this end. Full cooperation with Voss's team when they arrive," she said. "Preservation of all facility records in the windows I identified. And your honest testimony about Warren's administrative role, what he had access to, how he used it, what you observed over 9 years." She paused. "That last one is going to be the hardest." "Yes," he said, "but it's the most important." "I know." He straightened slightly. "You'll have all of it." She nodded. She turned to go. "Bennett." She stopped again. "When this is over," he said, "when the investigation is done, and the proceedings are finished, and this unit has figured out what it is, without Warren, I'd like you to stay." She turned around. He met her eyes. "Officially," he said. "Full posting. No observer designation, no support role. I'm submitting the request to Voss today." He paused. "This unit needs people who ask the questions that should have been asked. We need people who see what we've been trained not to look at." He looked at her. "We need you." She stood there for a moment. She thought about Jamie's photograph in her field bag. She thought about the drainage channel and the 12-meter window and the one shot that shouldn't have been possible. She thought about a folded map with a coffee stain on the corner and a man who had believed completely and correctly that she was the most careful person he had ever worked with. "I'll consider it," she said. It wasn't a yes, but the way she said it, even Hayes, who had been reading people wrong all week, could hear that it wasn't a no. The morning that followed was one of the strangest in the facility's recent memory. Training continued as Hayes had ordered, but the texture of it was different, tighter, more deliberate. The particular focus of people who needed the work to be real, because the alternative was standing still inside something they hadn't processed yet. Ava ran the morning movement assessment with the rest of the team. She didn't ask for accommodation, and Hayes didn't offer it. She hit every checkpoint, carried her weight, and did the work the same way she'd done everything since she arrived, without theater, without announcement, with the quiet consistency that Reed had started to understand was not personality, but methodology. Reed ran beside her for the last kilometer. He didn't say anything for the first 800 meters. Then he said, "Warren." "Yes," she said. "9 years," he said. "Yes." Another 200 meters. "I worked with him on 3 operational planning cycles," Reed said. "He reviewed my after-action reports. He had access to my team's mission packages. He was breathing controlled and deliberate the way distance runners did. Every package I filed in the past 2 years went through his administrative review." Ava looked straight ahead. "I know," she said. "Is there a reason to believe he interfered with any of them?" "I didn't find evidence of it," she said. "The routing logs only showed 3 flagged accesses, but the investigation will go through all of it." She glanced at him. "If there's something in your packages that doesn't sit right, something you noticed at the time and dismissed, tell Voss's team when they arrive. Even small things." Reed ran in silence for a moment. "2 years ago," he said. "The Kodiak rotation. We had a targeting discrepancy in the 3rd-day brief. I flagged it to Warren. He said it was a data entry error, corrected and resubmitted." He looked straight ahead. "The corrected version matched the field conditions. So it didn't affect the outcome." "No, but I never saw the original entry error documented in the system." Ava filed that. "Tell Voss," she said. "Exactly what you just told me. The fact that it didn't affect the outcome doesn't mean it wasn't part of a pattern he was establishing." Reed nodded. They crossed the finish point. He put his hands on his knees briefly, then straightened. "I would have caught it," he said. She looked at him. "If he had touched one of my active mission packages in a way that mattered," Reed said, "I would have caught it." She believed him. She also understood that the reason he needed to say it out loud had nothing to do with whether it was true. "I know," she said. He nodded once and walked toward the equipment area. Kowalski found her at 1100 in the map room, running through a terrain analysis she hadn't been assigned and nobody had asked for. He knocked on the open door and she looked up and waved him in. He sat down across from her. Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "The night before the exercise," he said, "when you asked me about the eastern approach, the drainage channel, the wind behavior." "Yes." "You already knew what you were going to use it for." She looked at him. "I knew the primary shooting solution was going to be compromised," she said. "I knew I needed an alternative. The eastern channel was the only geometry that worked. But you asked me anyway." "Because theory and field behavior aren't always the same thing," she said. "You'd been on that mountain. I hadn't. What you told me confirmed the practical behavior in a way the maps couldn't." He was quiet for a moment. "Did you know it was Warren?" he said. "Before you went into the meeting, I had a specific hypothesis," she said. "The evidence pointed there. I wasn't certain until the meeting confirmed it." "But you walked in there certain." She looked at him carefully. "I walked in there prepared," she said. "There's a difference. If I'd walked in there certain, I would have gone in with my conclusion already fixed. I went in with the evidence, and I let it land where it landed." She paused. "Certainty before the fact is how people get it wrong. Preparation is how you make sure you're ready when the fact arrives." Kowalski thought about that. "Is that what you were doing on the range yesterday?" he said. "Before the meeting." She looked at him. "You saw that?" "I was doing cleaning rotations on the equipment near the range window." She considered how to answer. "I shoot to think," she said. "Some people run. Some people go quiet. I shoot. The mechanics of it clear something." She looked at the map in front of her. "Yesterday I needed to be very clear." He nodded. "What were you thinking about?" She was quiet for a moment. "Whether getting the answer I'd been looking for was going to feel like what I thought it would feel like," she said. "And did it?" She looked at the map. "No," she said. "It felt like the beginning of a different kind of work." She looked up at him. "Which is probably right." He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "Hayes is submitting a posting request for you." "He told you." "He told Reed. Reed told Cho. Cho told me." He looked at her. "It's a small building." She almost smiled. "The credential pattern in the routing logs," she said, shifting without transition. "You understand what it means for how we manage access going forward." He blinked at the change in direction. Yes, I think so." "Tell me." He straightened slightly the way people did when they understood a test was happening. "Secondary credentials need active monitoring, not just deactivation filing. The gap between filing and execution was where he had the window. And what does that require structurally?" "A verification layer," he said. "Someone who checks that the execution actually happened, not just that the order was filed. Automated or human?" He thought about it. "Both. Automated flag for any credential active past its deactivation date, human review triggered by the flag." He looked at her. "That would have caught it within days." "Write it up," she said. "1 page. Give it to Hayes by end of day." He stared at her. "You want me to write the recommendation?" "You just articulated it correctly," she said. "Write it up." She looked back at the map. "You're going to be good at this, Kowalski. Stop waiting for someone to tell you that." He stood up slowly, like he wasn't sure whether to believe what had just happened. "Captain," he said. She looked up. "Were you always like this?" he said. "Or did it take—" He stopped. "I'm sorry. That's not—" "Like what?" she said. He searched for the right word. "Like you already know what everyone in the room needs before they know it themselves," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "I used to trust the plan more than the ground under my feet." She looked at the map. That changed. He nodded and left. She stared at the terrain grid in front of her. Then she pulled a pencil from beside the map and started marking positions, not for any exercise, not for any assignment, just the habit of it. Reading what the ground said. Listening for what the plan left out. The afternoon brought something nobody had planned for. At 1400, a vehicle arrived at the facility gate carrying 2 people from Voss's office, an investigator named Caldwell and a forensic systems analyst whose name Ava didn't catch because she was focused on the second thing that arrived with them. Warren had submitted a formal statement through his counsel. Hayes called her into his office at 1430. He had the statement on his desk. He looked like he had read it once and was working up to reading it again. "You should see this," he said. She sat down. She read it. It was 16 pages. Legal language strategic framing carefully structured to present the coordinate modification as an authorized protective measure taken to preserve a critical intelligence asset. A decision made within his authority as Senior Intelligence Coordinator for the Joint Task Force at the time. Her mission. Her team. Her dead. Reframed as authorized. She read it all the way through without stopping. Then she set it on the desk. "He's arguing that the modification fell within his operational discretion," she said. "Yes," Hayes said. "And that the failure of the operation was attributable to field conditions rather than the intelligence modification." "Yes." She looked at the statement on the desk. "He had operational discretion over source protection," she said. "He did not have authority to modify a mission intelligence package without notifying the task force commander." She looked at Hayes. "The notification protocol is documented. It was mandatory. He didn't follow it." His counsel is arguing that in high-sensitivity source protection scenarios, the notification protocol created an unacceptable compromise risk. That argument requires him to demonstrate that he assessed the compromise risk before modifying the package, she said, which requires documentation of that assessment. She looked at him. "Does he have it?" Hayes was quiet. Caldwell asked the same question, he said. "Warren's counsel is requesting 48 hours to produce supporting documentation." She looked at the ceiling briefly. "He's buying time to build it," she said. "That's Caldwell's read too." "What's Voss's position?" "Voss is requesting a judicial hold on all document creation and modification in the relevant records system." He paused. The request was granted 20 minutes ago. The tension in her chest loosened slightly. Then whatever documentation he produces in the next 48 hours can be verified against the system timestamps, she said. Yes. And if it was created after the hold? It doesn't exist, Hayes said. Legally. She nodded. She picked up the statement. She read the last 3 pages again. The section where Warren's counsel described the mission failure, the losses, the aftermath. The language was clinical and precise and absolutely bloodless. Jamie Croft appeared as Specialist J. Croft KIA. Dure Paulson appeared as Specialist A. Paulson KIA. 2 sets of initials in a paragraph structured to minimize. She set it back down. He's not wrong that he believed he was protecting something, she said. Hayes looked at her. He made an unauthorized decision, she said, that he convinced himself was justified. And when it went wrong, he covered the evidence instead of coming forward because coming forward would have meant admitting that the justification he'd convinced himself of wasn't actually authorization. She looked at the statement. That's not a defense. That's a description of exactly what happened. Caldwell is going to want your testimony, Hayes said. I know, I'll give it. It's going to be detailed. They'll push on the timeline, the evidence chain, the methodology you used to trace the routing tag. I've been building that record for 3 years, she said. Let them push. Hayes looked at her across the desk, really looked at her the way he hadn't been able to when she first walked in, because he'd been looking at a file instead of a person. When Voss approved your posting request, he said slowly, she knew what you were coming here to find. Yes, Ava said. She sent you here specifically. She approved my request specifically, she said. There's a distinction. I asked. She said yes, because she knew the investigation needed someone who could get inside the facility on legitimate grounds, establish credibility, build access to the routing data, and do all of it without tipping off the person they were looking at. She paused. I was the logical choice. Because you had personal investment. Because I had the specific technical knowledge to interpret what the log said, she said. The personal investment was, she stopped. It was fuel. It kept me at it when the thread went cold, but it wasn't the qualification. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Did you know, he said carefully, when you walked through that door when I held up your rifle case and said, what I said, did you know that I was going to be this difficult? She looked at him. And for the first time since she had arrived at this facility, the thing that moved across her face was unambiguously, unmistakably a smile. I read your file, she said. He stared at her. Personal notes section was empty, she said. He blinked. Then something in his face did what Reed's face had done, the involuntary concession, the opening of something that had been held too tightly. Empty sections, he said slowly. That's where the actual information lives. The actual information, she said that you were the most rigorous evaluator in this facility's history. That you had sent 41 candidates home without exception. That you trusted your read on people absolutely. She looked at him steadily. I knew you were going to be exactly as difficult as someone who had never been wrong needed to be. Hayes looked at the desk. Then he looked at the Warren statement. Then he looked at her. I held up your rifle case, he said. You did. And you said, I said the results do, she said. Because I knew that was the only language that was going to work. She paused. I needed you to be the kind of person who would respond to evidence. I needed you to be wrong about me in a way that would make you willing to be right later. She looked at him. I needed you to be exactly who you are. The room was very quiet. The exercise modification, he said. The installation that was moved. You think Warren arranged that? I think it's possible, she said. I haven't established it yet. It may have been routine exercise variation. Hayes, those happen. It may have been coincidence. She paused. But the timing, the pattern, the way it created exactly the right conditions to expose a gap in my credibility before I could build any yes. I think it's worth asking. Hayes looked at the window. He knew you were coming, Hayes said. Someone did, she said. Whether it was Warren specifically or someone who told Warren. She shook her head. That's the next layer. That's what Caldwell is going to need to follow. Hayes stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment. If someone warned him, he said, that means the investigation has a leak. Yes, she said. Which means we don't know yet how far this goes, she said. Warren may not be the end of it. He may be the most visible part of something larger. She looked at Hayes steadily. Which is why I need you to be very careful about who you discuss this with until Caldwell has had time to run the secondary trace. Hayes turned from the window. Including Reed, he said. She looked at him. Reed was in Norway, she said. His alibi is documented. His access pattern is clean. She paused. But yes, even Reed. Until Caldwell clears the secondary trace, this conversation, and what it implies, stays in this room. Hayes nodded slowly. He sat back down. He looked like a man who had aged somewhere in the past 24 hours. Not in a way that showed on his face exactly, but in a way that showed in how he held himself, the slight additional weight in his posture that came from carrying a facility's trust and discovering that trust had been compromised at its foundation. I am going to need, he said quietly, to completely rebuild how this unit handles intelligence access. Yes, she said. That's 6 months of structural work, minimum. Kowalski is bringing you a recommendation by end of day, she said. Start there, it's good. Hayes looked at her. You assigned Kowalski a structural recommendation. He came to the conclusion himself, she said. I told him to write it down. Hayes sat with that for a moment. You've been here 5 days, he said. Yes, she said. You've closed a 3-year investigation, identified a systemic access vulnerability, and started developing my most junior specialist. She looked at him without expression. I've had a busy week, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then for the first time in 5 days, despite everything, Commander Lucas Hayes laughed. It wasn't a long laugh. It wasn't a comfortable one. It was the specific laugh of a person who had arrived at the far end of something genuinely terrible and found against all odds a single human moment waiting for them there. She looked at him. She didn't laugh. But the smile came back quieter this time and more real. Get some sleep tonight, she said. Caldwell's team starts at 0700. She picked up the Warren statement and stood. Bennett, he said. She paused. Thank you, he said. Not officially, not procedurally, just a man saying the true thing in the room where it needed to be said. She looked at him. Don't thank me yet, she said. We're not finished. She walked out. The corridor was quiet around her. From somewhere in the facility, she could hear the muffled sound of the team running a late equipment check. The low voices and small metallic sounds of people doing their work, maintaining the rhythm of the institution, even while the institution was revising itself from the inside. She walked toward this communications room. She needed to reach Voss before 1800. She needed to tell her what Hayes had said about the leak, about the possibility that Warren had been warned that there was a secondary layer to this that Caldwell would need to trace. She also needed to tell Voss something she had not yet told anyone. The routing tag from her mission package, the one that had led her here, had a secondary marker. She had found it in the first pass of the logs and set it aside because it had pointed somewhere. She hadn't expected somewhere. She wasn't ready to follow until she had the primary thread resolved. It pointed to a communication node outside this facility. Not far outside. Not a foreign system, not an adversarial architecture. A domestic relay, legitimate institutional access, clean on its face. The kind of clean that required knowing exactly how to look clean. She reached the communication room door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. 3 years ago, she had trusted the plan and lost Jamie. She was not going to trust the plan now. She was going to trust the ground and the data and the next thing the thread required. She opened the door. She had work to do. Voss picked up on the second ring. That alone told Ava something. Voss was the kind of person who let calls go to 3 rings as a matter of discipline. She had explained it once years ago as a habit she'd built to ensure she was mentally present before she spoke. 2 rings meant she had been waiting. You found the secondary marker, Voss said. Not a question. Ava closed the communications room door behind her and sat down. You knew it was there, Ava said. I suspected it was there, Voss said. There's a difference. Tell me what you found. A domestic relay node. Clean architecture, legitimate institutional access. It's not Warren's signature, the routing pattern is different. Tighter, more deliberate. She pulled up the log on the terminal in front of her. Warren built access through administrative convenience. He used what he already had. This second node was constructed specifically. Someone built it to exist and built it to look like it didn't. Which requires what? Voss said. Technical knowledge above Warren's documented capability, Ava said. And access to the relay infrastructure at an architectural level, not just an administrative one. She paused. Warren was the user. Someone else built the system he used. The silence on the line had weight. How long? Voss said. Ava looked at the timestamp architecture in the routing logs. She had been building this analysis in the margins of everything else for the past 18 hours, quietly without announcing it, the same way she had built the primary case against Warren while carrying a trauma kit on a mountain. The secondary node has been active for at least 5 years, she said. Possibly longer. The oldest verifiable access I can trace goes back to a window that predates Warren's posting here by 14 months. Another silence. Sandra, Ava said, using the first name deliberately, because what she was about to say required the conversation to be between two people, not two ranks. Warren wasn't the architect of this. He was recruited into an existing structure. I know, Voss said. Ava went very still. You know, she said. I've known there was a secondary layer for 8 months, Voss said. I didn't know where it connected. The domestic relay node was the missing piece, the part of the architecture I couldn't locate. A pause. That's why you're there. Not just for Warren. Warren was the accessible entry point. You were always going to find the thing behind him. Ava sat with that for a moment. She thought about Voss approving her posting request within hours. She thought about the routing logs arriving at 0600 prepositioned already unlocked, as though someone had anticipated exactly what she would need and when she would need it. She thought about a woman who had been classification authority on her service record for 4 years and who answered on the second ring. You've been running me, Ava said. Not with anger. With the specific precision of someone identifying what is true. I've been supporting your investigation with information. I couldn't give you officially without compromising the secondary trace, Voss said. There's a difference. The line between those things is thin. Yes, Voss said. It is. I know that. And I know what I'm asking you to carry by telling you now instead of 3 months ago. A pause. I'm telling you now because you're at the threshold, and I need you to walk through it with full information. Ava looked at the routing log. The secondary node, she said. The person who built it. You have a name. I have a profile, Voss said. Incomplete. The name is what the secondary trace is going to confirm or eliminate. Another pause. The profile points to someone inside the intelligence coordination structure at the Joint Task Force level. Someone with 5+ years of systematic access across multiple facilities. Someone who has been very careful and very patient, and who made one mistake. What mistake? Ava said. They used the same architectural signature on 2 separate nodes, Voss said. The one you found at this facility, and one we identified 8 months ago at a different installation. Different geography, different operational function, same construction pattern, like a fingerprint. Ava leaned forward. You have the fingerprint, she said. What you need is the hand. Yes. And you need it to be clean. It has to be airtight, Voss said. Because the profile, the level this person operates at, means the moment we move on them. Every lawyer in Washington is going to be in that room within the hour. If the evidence chain has a single gap, they walk. A pause. There can be no gaps. Ava thought about the 47-page analysis she had written 3 years ago. She thought about the thread she had followed through routing logs and credential records and movement timestamps and facility audits. She thought about every step she had taken, documented, verified, and preserved. Send me the fingerprint, she said. The architectural signature. Everything you have on the secondary node at the other installation. It's already on its way, Voss said. Check your secure terminal in 12 minutes. Ava looked at this terminal. Sandra, she said. Ava. If this goes where you think it goes, if the profile is who I think you're implying. It might be this stops being a facility investigation and becomes something else entirely. Yes, Voss said. It does. And you need it to be me who closes it. A pause that lasted long enough to confirm everything. You followed the thread from the beginning, Voss said. You have the complete evidentiary chain from the original mission modification through Warren through the secondary node. No one else has that full picture. No one else can assemble the testimony the way you can. Another pause. And yes, I need it to be you. Because you're the one person in this chain whose motivations are completely transparent. You lost someone. You followed the evidence. You documented everything. There is no question about who you are or why you did this. Voss's voice was steady and quiet. That matters enormously in what's coming. Ava closed her eyes for 3 seconds. She thought about what transparent motivation meant. It meant Jamie's name was going to be in every document, every proceeding, every formal record of what happened here and what it led to. It meant the thing she had carried privately for 3 years was going to become institutional record. It meant Jamie was going to be seen. All right, she said. Send the files. She hung up and waited for the secure transfer. The files arrived in 11 minutes. She spent the next 4 hours in the communications room with the door locked and a coffee that went cold, and the particular focused silence of someone who was reading the shape of something for the first time and understanding piece by piece what it meant. The architectural fingerprint was unmistakable once she knew what to look for. The same routing logic, the same credential duplication method, the same timestamp obfuscation pattern. It was as distinctive as handwriting, more distinctive because handwriting could be disguised, and this couldn't. This was the way someone thought. The structure of how they solved a specific problem. You could change the tools, but you couldn't change the thinking behind them. She cross-referenced the fingerprint against every name in the Joint Task Force coordination structure that had access to both installation networks. The list started with 47 names. By hour 2, it was 11. By hour 3, it was 4. By hour 4, 1 name remained. She sat back from the terminal. She looked at the name on the screen. Brigadier General Alan Mercer. 57 years old. 29 years of service. 3 commendations for intelligence coordination excellence. Currently serving as Deputy Director of Joint Task Force Oversight, based in Washington, with supervisory authority over 14 facilities across the Pacific Theater, including this one. She had read his name before. In the Joint Task Force documents from her original mission. In the chain of authorization for the intelligence package that had gone wrong. His signature was 2 levels above Warren's on the operational hierarchy, far enough above that no one had looked at him when the mission failed. The investigation at the time had focused on field-level decisions. Mercer had been exactly where people like Mercer were always safe above the altitude where scrutiny naturally landed. She stared at his name. She thought about Warren, his statement, his careful legal language, his counsel's 48-hour delay request. She thought about what Warren had said in Hayes's office. The asset was connected. The redirect was necessary. The source had to be protected. She thought about who ran sources at the level above Warren's authority. She thought about who would have known the asset existed, known the operational timeline, known that Warren's unauthorized modification was going to happen before it happened, because they had told Warren to do it. She thought about what it meant that the asset died anyway. She picked up the secure phone. Voss answered on the first ring this time. Mercer, Ava said. The silence on the other end was the longest Voss had ever given her. Yes, Voss said. He told Warren to modify the package. That's the hypothesis, Voss said. Warren acted without official authorization, because Mercer couldn't give official authorization, not on record, not through documented channels. But the direction came from above. Warren took the liability, Ava said. Mercer kept his hands clean. Warren took what he believed was a manageable risk, Voss said. He thought the operation would succeed despite the redirect. He thought the asset would move, the team would extract, and the modification would disappear into the operational noise. When it went wrong and people died. A pause. Mercer let him absorb the exposure. Warren stayed silent because coming forward meant admitting to the unauthorized modification, which meant the investigation would go higher than him. And Mercer stayed silent because Warren's silence protected them both. 3 years, Ava said. 3 years, Voss said. She looked at Mercer's name on the screen. The secondary node, she said. He built it to maintain oversight of the cover, to monitor whether the investigation was moving toward him. Yes, and to manage any additional modifications required to protect the existing cover. A pause. There were 2 others, Ava, after your mission. Different facilities, different operations. Both involved coordinate or intelligence modifications that created conditions favorable to source extraction at the expense of field team safety. Ava pressed her hand flat against the desk. How many casualties? She said. Across all 3 incidents, 6 total. She breathed. In and out. 6 names that had gone home to families with operational cover stories. 6 families that had been told something that wasn't the complete truth. 6 people who had trusted the intelligence package and walked into positions the package had deliberately compromised. 6 Jamie Crofts. I need everything you have on the other 2 incidents, she said. The evidentiary chain has to connect all 3. If we only prosecute the case I built, Mercer's counsel argues it's isolated. One subordinate's unauthorized decision. If we connect all 3, it becomes a pattern of directed conduct, Voss said. I know. The files are already compiled. I've been waiting for you to close the Warren case before sending them, because I needed the primary thread secured first. A pause. You have 48 hours before Mercer becomes aware that the investigation has moved to his level. Our counterintelligence team estimates that's the window before the secondary node traffic, or the absence of it, signals him that something has changed. 48 hours, Ava said. To build a case that connects 3 operations across 5 years to a sitting brigadier general with 29 years of institutional relationships and the best legal team government money can retain. Voss paused. Can you do it? Ava looked at the name on the screen. She thought about a drainage channel and a 12-meter window and an 8-inch gap. She thought about what it meant to prepare for the thing that wasn't supposed to happen. Send the files, she said. She worked through the night. Hayes found her at 0300 when he came to check the communications room and saw the light under the door. He knocked. She said, "Come in." He looked at the terminal, at the files spread across the desk, at the cold coffee, and the 3 pages of handwritten notes she'd been using to track the evidentiary connections. He didn't ask what she was doing. I went to the small cabinet in the corner of the room, found the emergency supply of ground coffee that every secure communications room kept for exactly this kind of night, and made a fresh pot without being asked. He set a cup beside her. He sat down in the chair against the wall. She worked. He stayed. Not speaking, not asking questions, not offering help she hadn't requested. Just present the way a good commander was present, available, without being intrusive, steady, without being performative. At 0430, she looked up. There are 3 operations, she said. He met her eyes. All 3 follow the same pattern. Intelligence modification, creating a favorable extraction window for a source asset. Field team compromised in each case. Warren was directly involved in 2 of them, this one and a second operation, 14 months later. The third predates Warren's involvement. Different facility, different personnel, same architectural signature in the routing modification. She looked at him. They all traced to Mercer. Hayes was very still. Alan Mercer, he said. Yes. He looked at the wall. He looked at his coffee cup. He looked at nothing specific for a moment. I've briefed under Mercer, he said. He sat at my table during the Pacific Coordination Summit 2 years ago. He asked about my unit's readiness assessments. He stopped. He was asking about our systems, our access architecture. Probably yes, she said. He was assessing whether this facility was useful to him. Probably yes. Hayes's jaw tightened. 6 casualties, she said, across 3 operations, all covered by operational loss classification, all with families who received incomplete information. Hayes stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there long enough that the eastern sky began to shift from black toward the particular dark blue that came 20 minutes before dawn. "What do you need?" he said. His voice was controlled and precise, and completely committed. "Caldwell's team needs to know the investigation has expanded," she said. "But carefully, Voss's counterintelligence team has a 48-hour window before Mercer's awareness threshold. If Caldwell's team has any connection to Mercer's network." "I'll tell Caldwell personally," Hayes said. "Eyes only in this room with the secure terminal documented." He turned from the window. "What else?" "Reed," she said. "I need Reed to verify something in the Kodiak rotation records, the targeting discrepancy he flagged to Warren 2 years ago. I think it's the second incident. I need the original discrepancy documented in Reed's own words before Mercer's counsel can argue it wasn't flagged." "I'll get Reed," Hayes said. "At 0600, she said. "Not before. Let him sleep." Hayes almost smiled. "You've been working all night." "I don't sleep before the shot," she said. "Reed should." Hayes picked up his jacket from the chair. "Bennett," he said. She looked up. "When this is over," he said. "When Mercer is in a room with Voss's team and his lawyers, and the complete evidentiary chain you've built, what happens to you?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You came here with a specific mission," he said. "The mission is almost complete. The investigation moves to Voss's level, to Caldwell's team, to people with the institutional authority to close it formally." He looked at her steadily. "You're not a prosecutor. You're not a federal investigator. When you hand this off—" He stopped. "I'm asking what you want to happen." She held his gaze. "I want to go back to work," she said. "Real work. The work I was doing before the mission went wrong and I spent 3 years following the thread." She looked at the terminal. "I want to go up a mountain with a rifle and a team that trusts me, and I want to do the job I trained to do." A pause. "I want to stop being the person who's trying to fix what broke and go back to being the person who makes sure it doesn't break." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then stay," he said. "When this is over. The posting request is already in." She looked at him. "I'll consider it," she said for the second time. But this time, it was warmer. This time, there was less distance between the considering and the answer. He heard it. He was a man who had spent 20 years reading rooms. He heard it. He left her to work. Reed came at 0600. She showed him the Kodiak files. She showed him the architectural fingerprint. She showed him how the targeting discrepancy he had flagged to Warren aligned precisely and damningly with the second incident in the pattern. He read through it twice. He looked at her. "Warren told me it was a data entry error," he said. "It was a deliberate modification," she said. "The source asset in that operation moved through the target zone during a 12-minute window created by the discrepancy. The operation succeeded from Mercer's perspective. Your team wasn't compromised because you caught the discrepancy before it affected your approach. Because I flagged it." "Because you flagged it," she said. "You interrupted the pattern. That's why there were no casualties in the second incident. Not because the modification was different, but because you didn't trust the brief." Reed looked at his hands. "I almost didn't flag it," he said. "Warren was senior. The correction he submitted matched the field conditions. I almost let it go." "But you didn't." He was quiet. "Jamie Croft," he said. "Andre Paulson." "Yes. If someone had flagged the discrepancy in that package—" "Yes," she said. She said it simply and completely, without padding it, because he deserved the simple truth of it and not a managed version. "If someone had caught it and flagged it, the outcome would have been different." Reed sat with that. "Write down everything you told me about the Kodiak discrepancy," she said. "Exact timing, exact content of your conversation with Warren, exact language he used when he explained it, dated, signed on the secure record." She paused. "Your account closes the second incident. It's the piece that connects the pattern to Warren's active conduct rather than administrative error. Reed picked up the pen she slid across the desk. He wrote. She watched him do it, the deliberate, careful handwriting of someone who understood that what he was putting on paper was going to matter long after this room this morning. This particular cold Alaskan 0600 had passed into history. He finished. He signed it. He dated it. He slid it back. Is there anything else? He said. One thing, she said. When Voss's team arrives, and they will arrive within the week, they're going to want to speak with every senior operator in this unit about their interactions with Warren, their briefings, their mission packages, anything that passed through his administrative review. She looked at him. I need you to be the person who helps Hayes manage that process, who makes sure people understand what to look for and why it matters. You want me to run the internal coordination. You're the most credible person in this unit, she said. The team trusts you. Hayes trusts you. When you tell them that this process is important and that their participation matters, they'll believe it. She paused. I can't do that. I'm still the outsider who walked in 5 days ago. You're 17 years of this unit's trust. Reed looked at her. You're asking me to use my credibility to support your investigation, he said. I'm asking you to use your credibility to support the truth, she said. The investigation is just the vehicle. He looked at the signed statement in front of her. Done, he said. At 100, Caldwell's team received the expanded brief. Caldwell was a compact, precise woman of about 45, who asked questions with the particular economy of someone who already understood most of the answer and was using the question to confirm the final piece. She read through Ava's compiled documentation for 90 minutes without speaking. Her forensic analyst sat beside her running parallel verification on the routing architecture. At 12:45, Caldwell looked up. This is complete, she said. Yes, Ava said. The architectural connection to Mercer is verifiable through independent forensic analysis. The routing signature is mathematically distinctive, Ava said. Your analyst can verify it without my interpretation. The fingerprint stands on its own. Caldwell looked at her analyst. The analyst nodded without looking up from the terminal. The timestamp chain is unbroken, Caldwell said. Every access event is logged with system-generated timestamps that predate any aspect of this investigation, Ava said. Nothing was created after the fact. The judicial hold Voss obtained yesterday ensures that Mercer's team cannot produce retroactive documentation. Caldwell closed the file. Captain Bennett, she said. I've been doing federal investigation work for 18 years. I have seen evidentiary packages assembled by teams of 12 analysts with 6 months and a full budget. She looked at Ava directly. This is the cleanest solo-built chain I have encountered. Ava looked at her. It took 3 years, she said. I know, Caldwell said. I read your file. A pause. The real one. For a moment, something in Ava's chest moved, not dramatically, not visibly, but with the specific internal shift of a person who has been seen accurately by a stranger for the first time after a very long time of being seen wrong. What's the timeline? Ava said. We move on Mercer within the 48-hour window, Caldwell said. Coordinated with Voss's counterintelligence team. The secondary node goes dark at the same time we make contact, which eliminates his early warning capability. She paused. His counsel will be formidable. I know. The proceedings will be lengthy. I know. And your testimony will be central, Caldwell said. Multiple sessions. Detailed cross-examination. Everything you built, challenged piece by people who are very good at finding gaps. There are no gaps, Ava said. Caldwell looked at her for a moment. No, she said. There aren't. She closed her briefcase. We'll be in contact before we move. Stay available. She stood. Her analyst stood. They left. Hayes was leaning against the wall in the corridor when Ava came out. He looked at her face. Caldwell's satisfied, he said. Caldwell's satisfied, she confirmed. He exhaled. It's going to hold, he said. Not a question. It's going to hold, she said. He looked at the ceiling briefly. The specific gesture of a person releasing something they had been holding since the moment they understood what was at stake. From the far end of the corridor, she could hear the team running an afternoon drill, the sounds of people working, moving, doing the functional daily work of a unit that was still a unit, still operational, still itself, despite everything that had changed in the past 5 days. "They're still out there running drills," Hayes said. He sounded faintly surprised by it, the way people sometimes were when ordinary things continued alongside extraordinary ones. "That's what units do," she said. He looked at her. "Come on," he said. "I want you in the after-action debrief this afternoon, not as an observer." She looked at him. "Not as an observer," she confirmed. They walked down the corridor together toward the sound of the team. The debrief lasted 2 hours. Ava sat at the table, not against the wall, not at the edge, but at the table, and she participated the way she had not been able to participate in any debrief since she arrived, with the full weight of her knowledge and experience present in the room and visible to the people around her. Kowalski had submitted his structural recommendation to Hayes at 16:30 on time, 1 page, exactly as she had asked. Hayes had read it during a break in the debrief and passed it across the table to her without comment. She had read it and passed it back. It was good. It was better than good. It was the kind of thinking that came from someone who was learning to see the structure behind the surface, the administrative architecture, the points where systems relied on trust rather than verification, the gaps where a patient and deliberate person could build something invisible. She had written 2 words at the top of the page before passing it back. "Implement this." Hayes had looked at those 2 words. He had nodded. After the debrief, Garrett, the 25-year-old who had asked the bold question in formation that morning, found her by the equipment storage and stood in front of her with the posture of someone who had been working up to something. "Captain," he said. "Garrett." "I said something in formation this morning," he said. "That question I asked Hayes." "I remember. I was—" He stopped. "I don't know what I was. Curious. Uncomfortable. Looking for a way to make sense of what was happening by making it about someone I could point at." He looked at her. That wasn't fair. She looked at him. "You asked a direct question in formation," she said. "That's not a failure. That's the instinct of someone who wants to understand what's happening around them." She paused. "The growth is in learning to direct that instinct toward the right questions." He stood there. "What's the right question?" he said. She thought about it. "Not who caused the problem," she said. "What allowed the problem to exist? Those are different investigations, and they lead to different answers." She looked at him. "The first one finds a person. The second one finds a system. Systems are what actually protect people." He absorbed that. "Is that why you went after the routing architecture instead of just Warren?" "Warren was the visible piece," she said. "The routing architecture was the condition that made Warren possible. Fix Warren, you remove one person. Fix the architecture, you make it harder for the next Warren to build what he built." Garrett nodded slowly. "Kowalski's recommendation," he said. "Hayes mentioned it in the debrief, the credential verification layer." "Yes. That's what you mean." "That's what I mean," she said. "One specialist 5 days in this unit identified a structural gap and proposed a viable solution. That's the work." She looked at him steadily. "That's the work that matters." He stood there for another moment. "Captain," he said, "I'm glad you're here." She looked at him. "So am I," she said. And she meant it in a way she hadn't expected to mean it when she walked through the door 5 days ago carrying a rifle case and a reputation nobody knew. The call from Voss came at 2100. Mercer had been contacted by Caldwell's team at 1845 at his Washington office with the evidentiary package and 2 federal investigators and a counterintelligence officer who had shut down the secondary node at 1843, 2 minutes before contact, eliminating his warning window completely. His counsel had been in the room within 40 minutes. Mercer had said nothing, but the secondary node was dark. His administrative access to the Joint Task Force Coordination System had been suspended. The judicial hold was in place across all relevant facilities. And the evidentiary chain, 3 operations, 6 casualties, 5 years of systematic routing manipulation. 1. architectural fingerprint was already in the hands of the people who would carry it to its formal conclusion. "It holds," Voss said. "I know," Ava said. "His council is going to fight every element." "I know. It's going to take time." "I know," Ava said. "Sandra, I know all of that. Tell me the part I don't know." A pause. "Jamie's sister," Voss said. "Her name is Claire. She's been told the original casualty report was incomplete and that a corrected notification is being prepared. She'll receive it within the week." A pause. "She asked whether someone had been looking for what happened. She asked whether anyone had cared enough to look." Ava closed her eyes. "What did you tell her?" she said. "I told her yes," Voss said. "I told her someone had been looking for 3 years and that they'd found it." Another pause. "She asked who?" Ava was quiet. "What did you tell her?" she said again. "I told her the name of the person her brother trusted most," Voss said. "She said she already knew who that was." Ava pressed her hand flat against the desk. She breathed. She thought about the last thing Jamie had said before the operation. The last thing, the real last thing. Not the operational communication, but the actual human last thing, said in the moment before the brief ended and the work began. "We're good. We've got this." He had been wrong about the operation. He had not been wrong about her. "Thank you," she said to Voss. She said it the way Hayes had said it to her, not officially, not procedurally. Just the true thing said in the space where it needed to be said. "Get some sleep," Voss said. "You've earned it." She hung up. She sat in the quiet of the communications room for a moment. Outside, the facility had gone to its night rhythm. Minimal movement, reduced lighting, the skeleton crew of people who kept things running while the rest of the world slept. From somewhere down the corridor, she could hear the distant muffled sound of the mountain wind against the exterior walls. Alaska in the dark. Cold and enormous and indifferent and somehow exactly right. She reached into her field bag. She took out the photograph. Jamie. Grinning. The coffee-stained map. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it back. Not away, she was never going to put it away. But back in the front pocket where it lived, where she could reach it without looking where it was present. The way the people who mattered were always present not as weight, but as orientation. The thing that told you which direction was true north when everything else was noise. She picked up her field jacket. She walked out. Hayes was in the main room when she came through. He was sitting at the briefing table with a mug of coffee and a stack of personnel files. The beginning of the administrative, rebuild the structural work that was going to take months and require exactly the kind of rigorous question, everything attention that Warren's 9 years of comfortable trust had displaced. He looked up when she came in. "Mercer is in custody," she said. Hayes set down his mug. "The evidence held," he said. "The evidence held," she said. He sat back in his chair. Something left his face, the last of the active tension, the forward lean of a man waiting for the next thing to go wrong. What replaced it wasn't relief exactly. It was solidity. The look of a person who had found the ground under his feet again after a long time of not being sure it was there. "Then it's done," he said. She looked at him. "The investigation is done," she said. "The work isn't." He looked at the personnel files. He nodded. "No," he said. "The work never is." She crossed the room and sat down across from him. She pulled one of the personnel files toward her. He looked at her. "You're starting tonight," he said. "The posting request you submitted," she said. "Was it contingent on the investigation outcome?" "No," he said. She looked at him. "Then I'm staying," she said. "Officially, full posting." Hayes was very still for a moment. Then he reached across the table and opened the top personnel file. "Good," he said, simply, without theater. The way people said things when the thing was true and the truth was enough. They worked in silence for a while, the companionable, purposeful silence of two people doing a job that needed doing at a table in Alaska in the middle of the night, on the far side of something that had cost a great deal and had finally completely been resolved. At some point, Kowalski came through on a late-duty rotation. He saw them at the table. He started to back out. Hayes looked up. Kowalski, he said. Sir. The credential verification layer, the two-stage system in your recommendation. Hayes looked at him directly. Starting Monday, you're the implementation lead. Clear your training schedule for the week. Kowalski stared at him. He looked at Ava. She was reading a file. She didn't look up, but the corner of her mouth moved. Yes, sir, Kowalski said. He sounded like someone who had just been told something he didn't know how to hold yet, but was going to figure out. He left. The room went quiet again. Outside, the mountain wind pressed against the walls of the facility. Steady, enormous. The same wind that moved through drainage channels and compression zones and 12-meter windows. The same wind that told you everything about the ground if you knew how to listen. Ava Bennett knew how to listen. She had learned it the hard way, in the hardest possible classroom, from a loss that had taken 3 years to resolve and had changed her into something that the people in this building had failed to recognize when she walked through the door. They recognized it now. She had not come here for recognition. She had come here for the truth, and for Jamie, and for the 6 names that deserved better than the stories they had been given. She had come here, and she had done the work. Not with noise, not with demands, not with anger at the people who had looked at her and seen something smaller than she was, but with the only thing that had ever mattered. Preparation. Patience. The discipline to follow the thread wherever it led, regardless of what it cost, regardless of how long it took, regardless of who was watching or what they thought they saw. The quietest person in the room had been listening since before anyone knew her name, and everything she heard, she used. That was who Ava Bennett was. Not a legend, not a symbol, not a lesson delivered to people who needed to be taught. A soldier who did the work, a woman who kept her promise, a sniper who never once missed the shot that mattered because she had already calculated it long before anyone handed her the rifle. The results spoke. They always had.